September 20th, 1940. Third floor of the Munitions Building, Washington, D.C., 2:47 in the afternoon. The sound of pencil scratching across worksheets fills the cramped office where Genevieve Grotjan sits hunched over her desk, her eyes burning from another 14-hour shift. Around her, the Signal Intelligence Service hums with the muted desperation of 19 months without progress, typewriters clacking, phones ringing unanswered, and the acrid smell of coffee gone cold in chipped porcelain cups. Through the windows, the afternoon sun casts long shadows across rows of desks stacked with intercepted Japanese diplomatic cables, each one a locked vault that has refused to yield its secrets. Grotjan, 27 years old with a mathematics degree from SUNY Buffalo that couldn't secure her a college teaching position because she's a woman, has been staring at these same worksheets for the past 6 hours. Her statistical clerk job, calculating pensions for the Railroad Retirement Fund, was mind-numbing, but this is something else entirely. The Japanese B-type cipher machine, codenamed Purple by the Americans, has become a mathematical monster that devours every cryptanalytic technique thrown at it. The 6 letters she's tracking, the vowels, the sixes as the team calls them, dance across her worksheet in patterns that almost make sense, that tease the edge of comprehension before dissolving into chaos. Across the room, Frank Rowlett, the 32-year-old team leader from Virginia, with kind eyes and a mathematician's patience, is deep in conversation with 2 other cryptanalysts, their voices low and frustrated. Rowlett has been with William Friedman's operation since 1930, hired fresh out of Emory and Henry College as one of 3 junior cryptanalysts when the Signal Intelligence Service was nothing more than a dream and a budget of $3,000. Now, a decade later, with war consuming Europe and Japan's imperial ambitions spreading across Asia, the pressure to crack Purple has become suffocating. You can feel it in the room, the weight of 18 months of failure. Every morning brings fresh intercepts from Tokyo to its embassies in Washington, Berlin, Rome, London, diplomatic cables that might contain warnings, might reveal intentions, might give the United States the intelligence edge it desperately needs as the world slides toward catastrophe. And every morning, those intercepts remain impenetrable, locked behind a cipher system so sophisticated that even William Friedman, the man who literally wrote the textbooks on cryptanalysis, has begun to show cracks in his legendary composure. Grotjan's pencil stops moving. Her eyes fix on 4 specific locations on her worksheet where something, she can't yet articulate what, has aligned in a way she's never seen before. The correlations between plain text and ciphertext consonants, previously scattered like stars in a clouded sky, suddenly reveal a pattern, a structure, a glimpse of the mathematical architecture underlying the Purple machine. Her heart begins to pound as she checks the calculations again, then again, her hands trembling slightly as the implications wash over her. She stands up, her chair scraping against the worn wooden floor, and the sound cuts through the ambient noise of the office. Rowlett looks up, as do the 2 cryptanalysts with him, Albert Small and Robert Ferner, their conversation dying mid-sentence as they register the expression on Grotjan's face. In this world of mathematical precision and disciplined analysis, you learn to read emotions like code, and what they see in Grotjan's eyes makes them forget to breathe. "I have something to show you," Grotjan says, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Rowlett crosses the room in 4 strides, Small and Ferner right behind him, and they crowd around Grotjan's desk as she points to the 4 circled areas on her worksheets. For 3 heartbeats, there's absolute silence as the cryptanalysts process what they're seeing, the breakthrough that has eluded them for 19 months, the crack in Purple's armor that might, just might, lead them to the machine's secrets. The correlations Grotjan has identified between the plaintext and ciphertext equivalents of consonants, the 20s in their terminology, reveal cyclic sequences that shouldn't exist if Purple operated like any cipher machine they'd ever encountered. Rowlett's arms shoot up above his head, his hands clasped together like a victorious prize-fighter who's just won the championship bout. Albert Small begins to dance, actually dance around Grotjan's desk, his usual professional demeanor shattered by pure, unrestrained joy as he shouts, "Whoopee!" at the top of his lungs. Robert Ferner claps his hands together again and again, hollering, "Hurrah! Hurrah!" like a man possessed. And Rowlett, the careful, methodical team leader who never raises his voice, starts jumping up and down like a child on Christmas morning, crying out, "That's it! That's it! Jean has found what we've been looking for." The commotion draws William Friedman from his office down the hall, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes sharp as he takes in the scene. His normally sedate cryptanalysts celebrating like they've won the war itself. Rowlett, breathless with excitement, explains Grotjan's discovery while she stands there, overwhelmed, as the men around her realize that she's just accomplished something no one in America, perhaps no one in the world, has done before. She's found a way into the Japanese Purple machine without ever having seen it, touched it, or even glimpsed a photograph of it. Friedman studies the worksheets, his brilliant mind racing through the implications, and when he looks up, there's something in his expression that his team has rarely seen. Hope. There was much excitement, he'll write in his official report with characteristic understatement, at this first glimmer of light upon a subject that had for so many months been shrouded in complete darkness and regarded occasionally with some discouragement. But here, in this moment, watching his team celebrate, he permits himself a small smile and makes a decision that violates every bureaucratic protocol he's ever followed. "Coca-Cola's all around," Friedman announces, and the order goes out. In the middle of a workday, in the heart of America's most secret code-breaking operation, the cryptanalysts of the Signal Intelligence Service kick up their heels and toast Genevieve Grotjan with bottles of Coke, because she's just changed the course of the coming war. The Shadow arrives February 20th, 1939, Munitions Building, Washington, D.C., morning watch. The Intercept arrives via pneumatic tube from the Army's radio listening post, a cylinder of metal containing a strip of paper that will alter the trajectory of American cryptanalysis for the next 2 years. Frank Rowlett pulls the message from the tube and begins the routine process of attempting to apply the code-breaking techniques that have successfully penetrated the Japanese A-type cipher machine, RED, as the Americans call it, for the past 3 years. His pencil moves confidently across the worksheet, applying the known sequences, testing the standard patterns, working through the mathematical relationships that have become second nature to him. Nothing works. The message remains gibberish, an incomprehensible string of letters that refuses to yield to any technique in the cryptanalytic arsenal that Friedman has spent a decade developing. Rowlett tries again, wondering if he's made an error in transcription or calculation, but the result is the same: complete, impenetrable chaos. He reaches for another intercept from the same source, the Japanese embassy in Washington, and applies the same methods. Again, nothing. By mid-morning, the pattern is clear and deeply troubling. Messages from 11 key Japanese embassies, Washington, Berlin, Rome, London, Paris, Moscow, and 5 others, are suddenly unreadable, encrypted with a system that bears no relationship to the red machine that American cryptanalysts have mastered. The intercepts keep coming, tubes arriving every hour with fresh cables from Tokyo to its diplomatic posts around the world, and every single one is locked behind this new, unknown cipher. William Friedman stands in the center of the operations room, watching his team work through the impossible problem, and you can see the weight settling onto his shoulders. At 47 years old, he's already a legend in the small, secretive world of cryptanalysis. The man who transformed American code-breaking from an amateur hobby into a professional discipline, who wrote the foundational texts on cryptology, who personally broke some of the most complex cipher systems ever devised. But this new Japanese machine, this B-type that has suddenly replaced Red across Japan's diplomatic network, represents a challenge unlike anything he's encountered. You have to understand what they're facing. They don't know if this is a cipher or a code, whether it's hand-worked or machine-generated, whether it operates on substitution principles or something entirely novel. They have no intelligence about the machine itself, no photographs, no technical specifications, no reports from agents who might have glimpsed it in a Japanese embassy. They don't even know if it is a machine at all. All they have are intercepts, strings of enciphered letters arriving daily from radio intercept stations that ring the Pacific, and the abstract knowledge that somewhere inside those strings is the plain text that could reveal Japan's diplomatic intentions at a moment when the world is sliding toward war. Friedman calls his team together: Frank Rowlett, Abraham Sinkoff, Solomon Kullback, and the growing roster of junior cryptanalysts and assistants that the Army has finally authorized him to hire as war clouds gather. They're a remarkable group. These men and women who've been drawn to cryptanalysis from mathematics departments and graduate programs across America. Sinkoff and Kullback, both hired in 1930, just weeks after Rowlett, are Brooklyn boys who graduated together from City College of New York with mathematics degrees, both earning their masters from Columbia before joining Friedman's operation when it consisted of exactly 4 people, including Friedman himself. "We start from first principles," Friedman tells them, his voice carrying the calm authority that has guided this team through every challenge they've faced over the past decade. The first principle is frequency analysis. In any language, certain letters appear more often than others, and those frequencies leave traces even in sophisticated ciphers. Within days of the first purple intercepts arriving, the cryptanalysts identify a striking characteristic. 6 letters appear, with markedly higher frequency than the other 20. It's a clue, perhaps their only clue, and they seize it with the desperation of drowning men grabbing at a rope. The frequency pattern reminds them of Red, where 6 letters corresponded to the vowels in the Roman alphabet: A, E, I, O, U, and Y. The Japanese use Roman letters for their diplomatic ciphers rather than written Japanese characters because it reduces the complexity and size of the cipher machines and makes transmission over commercial, international cable systems cheaper. But whether these 6 high-frequency letters in purple represent vowels or something else entirely remains a mystery wrapped in mathematical obscurity. By March 1939, the Signal Intelligence Service has reorganized its entire operation around the purple problem. Every cryptanalyst, every assistant, every resource Friedman can muster is directed at these intercepts that pile up like snow in a blizzard. The munitions building, a massive temporary structure built during World War I that has somehow remained standing on the National Mall, becomes a fortress of secrets. Its third-floor offices, cramped and poorly ventilated, filled with metal desks and filing cabinets and the constant clatter of typewriters, house what may be America's most important intelligence operation. And almost nobody outside these walls knows it exists. The pressure intensifies through the spring of 1939 as international tensions escalate. In Europe, Hitler's Germany has absorbed Austria and Czechoslovakia and shows no sign of stopping. In Asia, Japan's war with China has been raging since 1937, and Tokyo's increasingly aggressive stance toward Western colonial possessions in the Pacific sends clear signals that confrontation may be inevitable. The State Department desperately needs intelligence on Japanese diplomatic intentions, needs to know what instructions are flowing from Tokyo to Ambassador Kensuke Horinuchi in Washington, to Ambassador Hiroshi Oshima in Berlin, to all the diplomatic posts where Japan is maneuvering in the complex chess game of international relations, and the Signal Intelligence Service cannot deliver. Every day brings fresh intercepts, and every day those intercepts remain unbroken, piling up in filing cabinets like accusations of failure. The team works 12-hour shifts, then 14-hour shifts, then shifts that blur into continuous work sessions as cryptanalysts stumble home for a few hours of sleep before returning to the munitions building and the endless grind of analysis. They're hunting patterns in what appears to be randomness, searching for structure in what might be chaos, trying to reverse engineer a machine they've never seen from mathematical principles they're not certain apply. Major General Joseph Mauborgne, the Army Chief Signal Officer who oversees this operation from his office in the munitions building, watches Friedman driving himself and his team to the edge of exhaustion and makes a decision. One afternoon in March, he calls Friedman into his office, and the conversation is brief and direct. "I want you to drop everything and take charge of this group that is working on the Japanese diplomatic cipher system," Mauborgne tells him, though Friedman is already effectively leading the effort. What Mauborgne is really saying, what both men understand without stating explicitly, is that breaking Purple has become the Signal Intelligence Service's top priority, that failure is not an option, and that Friedman has carte blanche to do whatever is necessary to crack this cipher. Friedman returns to the operations room and looks at his team, brilliant mathematicians working a problem that may be unsolvable, chasing shadows in an intellectual darkness so complete that they don't even know if they're making progress or simply exhausting themselves against an impenetrable wall. He thinks about his wife, Elizabeth, herself a distinguished codebreaker who's currently working against Nazi agents in South America, who understands the peculiar burden of cryptanalysis in a way few people in the world can. He thinks about the difference between paper ciphers and machine ciphers, how machine systems can go into hundreds and billions of computations and start from here and go to the end of the world and never have a repetition. And he wonders, not for the first time, whether Purple might be the cipher that finally defeats even his formidable team. But there's no choice except to continue. So they do. The Codebreakers, April 1st, 1930, Munitions Building, Washington, D.C. 10 years before Purple, there was a different kind of beginning. Frank Byron Rowlett, 21 years old, fresh from Emory and Henry College in rural Virginia with a bachelor's degree in mathematics and chemistry, walks into the munitions building for his first day of work as a junior cryptanalyst for the newly created Signal Intelligence Service. The position pays $2,000 per year, and Rowlett has absolutely no idea what a cryptanalyst does. But he's always loved puzzles, always excelled at mathematics, and the man who hired him, William F. Friedman, has a reputation as someone special. Friedman, then 38 years old with dark hair and an intense gaze, greets Rowlett in an office that could double as a mathematics library. Books and papers are stacked everywhere. Texts on cryptography and cryptanalysis in multiple languages, worksheets covered with frequency distributions and mathematical notations that look more like abstract art than intelligible writing. Friedman explains what they'll be doing here, creating and breaking codes and ciphers for the United States Army, protecting America's secret communications while penetrating those of potential adversaries. It's work that requires mathematical sophistication, linguistic facility, infinite patience, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. "Do you think you can do this?" Friedman asks. And Rowlett, with the confidence of youth and no real comprehension of what he's agreeing to, says yes. Within weeks, Rowlett is joined by two more junior cryptanalysts, Abraham Sinkoff and Solomon Kullback, both from Brooklyn, both mathematics graduates from City College of New York with master's degrees from Columbia. Sinkoff arrives on April 10th, Kullback on April 21st, and suddenly Friedman's Signal Intelligence Service has grown from one man to four. They're young, brilliant, and completely untrained in cryptanalysis, which is exactly what Friedman wants. He can teach them techniques, but he needs people who can think mathematically, who can see patterns, who won't be limited by conventional approaches to problems that may require unconventional solutions. The training program Friedman designs for his 3 recruits is brutal and comprehensive. He starts them with the fundamentals: substitution ciphers, transposition ciphers, frequency analysis, the difference between codes and ciphers that seems simple until you realize how profoundly it shapes cryptanalytic approach. He teaches them the history of cryptology from ancient Rome through World War I, showing them how cipher systems have evolved and how cryptanalysts have adapted their methods to break each new development. He assigns them problems to solve, starting with simple handwork ciphers and gradually increasing complexity until they're tackling systems that would have been considered unbreakable a generation earlier. But Friedman is training them for more than cryptanalysis. He needs them to be cryptographers as well, capable of designing secure communication systems for the US Army. Through the 1930s, as the Signal Intelligence Service slowly expands, Rowlett, Sinkoff, and Kullback split their time between breaking foreign ciphers and creating American ones, between attack and defense, between exposing weaknesses in enemy systems and ensuring those same weaknesses don't exist in US communications. You have to understand Friedman to understand this team. His path to cryptanalysis was itself improbable. He started as a geneticist, hired in 1915 by an eccentric millionaire named George Fabian to work on wheat genetics at Fabian's private research facility, Riverbank Laboratories, in Geneva, Illinois. But Fabian was obsessed with proving that Sir Francis Bacon had written Shakespeare's plays and hidden coded messages in the text to establish his authorship. And he wanted someone to find those codes. He hired Elizabeth Smith, a young woman with an English degree and a passion for Shakespeare, to hunt for Bacon's ciphers. William Friedman and Elizabeth Smith fell in love over cryptanalysis, married, and both discovered they had a gift for the arcane art of code breaking. When World War I erupted and America needed cryptanalysts, Riverbank Laboratories improbably became the launchpad for US cryptographic efforts, with William and Elizabeth Friedman as its stars. After the war, William became the Army's first full-time civilian cryptology employee, and by 1929 he'd risen to head the newly formed Signal Intelligence Service with a budget that barely covered office supplies and authorization to hire 3 assistants. Those 3 assistants, Rowlett, Sinkoff, and Kullback, become more than employees. They become partners in an intellectual enterprise that will shape American intelligence for decades. Friedman runs the Signal Intelligence Service not as a military hierarchy, but as a collaborative research team, encouraging his cryptanalysts to share ideas, challenge assumptions, work problems from multiple angles. When someone makes a breakthrough, the credit goes to the team, not the individual. When someone hits a dead end, the entire group pivots to find a new approach. Through the early 1930s, this tight-knit team cuts its teeth on Japanese diplomatic ciphers. Japan has emerged as the primary focus of American cryptanalytic efforts because the Army's military planners have identified the Japanese Empire as the most likely Pacific adversary in any future conflict. The Japanese are sophisticated cryptographers, and their diplomatic communications use increasingly complex systems. In 1936, Tokyo begins deploying a cipher machine for its most important diplomatic traffic, a device the Americans codename Red, based on the color of the binder holding intercepted messages. Red is Rowlett's triumph. Leading the cryptanalytic assault, he and the team spend months analyzing intercepted Red messages, searching for patterns, testing hypotheses about the machine's internal structure. They don't have a Red machine, have never seen one, don't know if it uses rotors or stepping switches or some other mechanism for scrambling plain text into ciphertext. All they have are the messages themselves and their mathematical intuition. By late 1936, they've broken Red completely, reconstructed its internal logic, and can read Japanese diplomatic traffic almost in real time. It's an extraordinary achievement, one that gives the US State Department unprecedented insight into Japanese diplomatic strategy during a period of rising tensions in Asia. But it's also a preview of what's coming. The Japanese know that cipher machines have limited operational lifespans, that given enough time and resources, skilled cryptanalysts can break any system. By late 1938, Japanese cryptographers are developing RED's replacement, something more sophisticated, more secure, more resistant to the kind of mathematical analysis that penetrated RED. In December 1938, an intercepted RED message indicates that in February 1939, Japan will switch 11 of its most important embassies to a new B-type cipher machine. The Signal Intelligence Service has 2 months warning, 2 months to prepare for the transition, 2 months that feel like both too much time and nowhere near enough. Friedman pushes his team to extract every possible lesson from their work on RED, to compile everything they know about Japanese cryptographic practices, to ready themselves for what may be their greatest challenge. By early 1939, the Signal Intelligence Service has grown to about a dozen cryptanalysts and support staff, all crammed into the third-floor offices of the munitions building. It's still a small operation by any measure, dwarfed by the cryptanalytic bureaus that Britain and France have built, but it's effective, professional, and led by a man who may be the most talented cryptanalyst in the world. Rowlatt, Sinkoff and Kullback, now in their early 30s with nearly a decade of experience each, have become formidable code breakers in their own right. But none of them, not Rowlatt with his breakthrough on RED, not Sinkoff and Kullback with their mathematical brilliance, not even Friedman with his legendary intuition, are prepared for purple. When those first intercepts arrive on February 20th, 1939, they're facing an intellectual challenge that will push every member of this team to their absolute limits. And for William Friedman, it will exact a price that no one anticipates. But that reckoning is still 2 years away. Right now, in April 1939, they're just beginning to understand what they're up against. Into the darkness. March through August 1940. Munitions building. Washington, D.C. 14 months into the purple problem, and the Signal Intelligence Service is no closer to solution than they were the day the first intercepts arrived. The operations room on the 3rd floor has taken on the character of an intellectual war zone. Walls covered with charts tracking letter frequencies, desks buried under worksheets dense with cryptanalytic notation, file cabinets overflowing with thousands of intercepted messages that remain stubbornly unreadable. You can smell the exhaustion in here, the accumulated sweat and stale coffee and cigarette smoke of men and women pushing themselves far beyond normal human endurance. Frank Rowlatt stares at the worksheet in front of him. The same worksheet he's been analyzing for the past 6 hours, and feels the familiar weight of futility settling over him. The sixes, the 6 high-frequency letters they're certain represent vowels, have been identified and can sometimes be recovered, creating skeletons of words that tease comprehension. But the 20s, the 20 consonants that carry the real information content of Japanese diplomatic messages, remain utterly impenetrable. And without the consonants, the vowels are useless, like having the bones of a body without the flesh, without the organs, without the life. The fundamental problem is one of staggering mathematical complexity. When Friedman's team analyzed purple intercepts using standard cryptanalytic techniques, they discovered something that should have been impossible. The number of repetitions in purple ciphertext was actually less than would be expected if the letters had been drawn randomly from a hat. In cipher systems based on cyclically repeating keys, the standard for machine ciphers in this era, repeated sequences of letters in the ciphertext typically reveal patterns that cryptanalysts can exploit. But Purple's ciphertext showed no such patterns, no casual repetitions within single messages, and when repetitions of 3 or 4 cipher letters did appear across different messages, they never represented the same plaintext. It's cryptographic chaos of a sophistication that defies everything Friedman has taught his team about cipher machines. Machine cipher can go into hundreds and billions of computations, Elizabeth Friedman will later explain, trying to convey the magnitude of what her husband faced. You can start from here and go to the end of the world and never have a repetition. That's the theoretical limit of machine cipher security, the nightmare scenario for cryptanalysts, and Purple appears to be approaching that limit. To make matters worse, in May 1939, the Japanese began using the Phillips code in conjunction with Purple. The Phillips code is a commercial system designed to shorten telegram lengths and reduce transmission costs by using arbitrary letter combinations to represent numbers, punctuation marks, words, syllables, and complete phrases. So even when the cryptanalysts managed to recover some plain text through analysis of the vowels, what emerges isn't readable Japanese or English, but rather gibberish, like HFAF, LX, MXK, GC, HGFA, WW, Zarav. Decoding this gibberish requires knowing that, for example, CFC means a period at the end of a sentence, and BKW means the United States. The difficulties introduced by the Phillips code, as Friedman writes in his official reports, are quite staggering as well as aggravating. Abraham Sinkoff and Solomon Kullback, working together as they've done since their Brooklyn high school days, have been attacking the problem from every mathematical angle they can conceive. They've tried frequency analysis beyond the initial identification of the 6 high-frequency letters. They've searched for positional patterns, for cyclic sequences, for any kind of regularity that might reveal the Purple machine's internal structure. They've studied the indicator groups that begin each message, trying to discern the keying system that tells the receiving Purple machine how to configure itself for decryption. Nothing yields results. By summer 1940, the psychological toll is becoming visible. William Friedman, who has driven this effort with relentless intensity for 18 months, shows signs of strain that worry his team. He's lost weight. His face has taken on a gaunt quality, and there are days when you can see him struggling to maintain the calm, collegial leadership style that has always characterized his management of the Signal Intelligence Service. The pressure is coming from multiple directions, from Major General Mauborn, who needs results to justify continued funding, from the State Department, which is desperate for intelligence on Japanese intentions as war in Europe rages and tensions in the Pacific escalate, from Friedman's own impossibly high standards and his knowledge that if anyone in America can break Purple, it should be his team. The work continues nonetheless, grinding forward with the inexorability of a glacier. The Signal Intelligence Service has expanded to accommodate the Purple effort, adding new cryptanalysts and assistants as the Army finally begins to grasp the strategic importance of signals intelligence. Among the new hires is Leo Rosen, an electrical engineer with a degree from MIT who brings a different perspective to the problem. While the mathematicians focus on abstract patterns and statistical analysis, Rosen starts thinking about the physical implementation of the machine itself. If Purple is indeed a cipher machine rather than a hand-worked system, then it must use some kind of electrical and mechanical components to scramble plain text into ciphertext. Understanding those components might provide a path forward. Another new hire, arriving in October 1939, is Genevieve Grotjan. 27 years old, summa cum laude mathematics graduate from SUNY Buffalo. She's been working as a statistical clerk, calculating pensions when Friedman recruits her as a junior cryptanalyst. In the male-dominated world of 1939 cryptanalysis, Grotjan is an anomaly, a woman with advanced mathematical training who's willing to work in near obscurity on problems that may never be solved. She's assigned to worksheet analysis, the tedious, eye-straining work of tracking letter patterns across hundreds of intercepted messages, searching for correlations that might reveal something about Purple's internal structure. The worksheets pile up through late 1939 and into 1940, thousands of pages of encrypted text subjected to most intensive and exhaustive cryptanalytic studies, as Friedman will later write. The team is looking for anything, any repeated sequence, any pattern, any anomaly that might give them a foothold. But Purple guards its secrets with a sophistication that suggests Japanese cryptographers understand modern cryptanalytic techniques, as well as Friedman himself. It's as if the machine was designed specifically to defeat the kind of mathematical analysis that broke Red, as if Tokyo knows what the Americans are capable of and has built a cipher system to counter those capabilities. By August 1940, morale is at its lowest point. 18 months of effort, thousands of man-hours, hundreds of intercepted messages analyzed and reanalyzed, and the Signal Intelligence Service has almost nothing to show for it. They can sometimes recover the 6 high-frequency vowels, creating partial skeletons of words, but without the consonants, this partial information is strategically worthless. They cannot read Japanese diplomatic traffic, cannot give the State Department or military planners the intelligence they desperately need, cannot fulfill the mission that justifies their existence. In a different organization, under different leadership, this might be the moment when the effort is abandoned, when someone higher in the chain of command decides that Purple is simply too hard, that resources should be redirected to other intelligence priorities. But Friedman doesn't abandon problems, and neither does his team. Rowlett will later say that his greatest contribution to breaking Purple was simply believing it could be done, maintaining faith when every rational analysis suggested they were attempting the impossible. The team needs a breakthrough, some new approach or insight that can crack open the mathematical structure of Purple. What they don't know, as summer turns to early autumn in 1940, is that the breakthrough is coming. That a young woman sitting at a worksheet-covered desk, her eyes burning from another 14-hour shift, is about to see something that no one else has seen. That September 20th, 1940, is going to change everything. But first, they have to survive August, have to maintain discipline and focus and hope through one more month of failure. So they do, because that's what cryptanalysts do. They persist. The vowel breakthrough, April 1939, Munitions Building, Washington, D.C. 2 months after the first Purple intercepts arrived, Leo Rosen makes a discovery that provides the first real glimpse into the machine's architecture. Rosen, the MIT-trained electrical engineer, has been approaching Purple not as a pure cryptanalytic problem, but as a reverse engineering challenge. Somewhere in Japan, there exists a physical machine that performs a specific sequence of electrical and mechanical operations to transform plain text into ciphertext. Understanding those operations doesn't require breaking the cipher mathematically. It requires thinking like an engineer, imagining what kind of device could produce the patterns visible in Purple intercepts. The 6 high-frequency letters have been identified through statistical analysis, and the working hypothesis is that they represent vowels. Rosen focuses his attention on these 6 letters, tracking how they transform from plain text to ciphertext across multiple messages. What he discovers is that the encipherment of these 6 letters follows a relatively simple pattern. They're rotated through a sequence of 25 positions before the sequence repeats. This is the behavior of a stepping switch, a type of rotary switch used in automatic telephone systems that cycles through a fixed number of contacts. It's a breakthrough, though not the breakthrough. Rosen has identified how Purple handles vowels, but the consonants, the 20s that carry the real information content, remain a mystery. Still, knowing that at least part of Purple's mechanism involves stepping switches is valuable intelligence. It narrows the field of possible machine architectures, provides a physical anchor for the mathematical analysis, and suggests that the Japanese are using commercially available telephone components rather than custom-built cryptographic hardware. Frank Rowlett and the cryptanalytic team seize on Rosen's discovery and begin to exploit it. If they know how the vowels are enciphered, and if they can identify which 6 plaintext letters are the vowels in any given message, then they can start recovering those letters and creating word skeletons. The process is painstaking. They need multiple messages with identical or near-identical indicator groups, messages that use the same key settings, so they can compare how the same plaintext produces different ciphertext under the same encipherment rules. By late spring 1939, the team is achieving limited but real success with vowel recovery. They're not reading complete messages, but they're extracting partial information, seeing fragments of words, getting glimpses of the underlying plaintext. It's like working a crossword puzzle, where you only have every 3rd or 4th letter. Frustrating, incomplete, but enough to occasionally deduce what the complete word must be. Then in May 1939, everything gets harder. Tokyo begins using the Phillips code in conjunction with purple, transforming the plaintext before it's enciphered. Now, even when the cryptanalysts successfully recover vowels, what they're seeing isn't readable language, but compressed commercial cable code. A recovered vowel skeleton might look like O-A-I-E-A-O, which corresponds to a Phillips code group O-I-E-R-O, which actually means embassy or some other word or phrase that requires a separate codebook to interpret. William Friedman, reviewing the partially recovered messages with their incomprehensible Phillips code plaintext, feels the weight of the challenge settling more heavily on his shoulders. They're facing a 2-stage encryption system. First, the plaintext is encoded using Phillips code, then that encoded text is enciphered using the purple machine. It's an elegant and devastating approach to communication security, leveraging 2 entirely different cryptographic techniques to create defense in depth. Breaking one stage doesn't give you readable intelligence. You have to break both. The team needs cribs, known plaintext that can be matched against ciphertext to reveal purple's encipherment patterns. Sometimes they get lucky, and the State Department obtains through diplomatic channels a plain text letter that was also sent encrypted through purple. Other times, during a transitional period when some Japanese embassies are still using red while others have switched to purple, identical messages are sent using both systems. Since red is broken, these dual encrypted messages provide the purple team with cribs they can use to probe the new machine's behavior. Lieutenant Francis A. Raven, a Navy cryptanalyst working on purple in parallel with the Army team, makes a crucial discovery about purple's keying system in late 1939. Japanese operators divide each month into 3 10-day periods, and within each period they use variations on the key from the first day. The variations follow predictable patterns, which means that if the cryptanalysts can break the key for day 1 of a period, they can derive the keys for days 2 through 10. It's exactly the kind of operational security weakness that Friedman has taught his team to look for. Humans implementing machine ciphers inevitably introduce regularities that pure machines wouldn't produce. But even with Rosen's engineering insights, even with occasional cribs from dual encrypted messages, even with Raven's discovery about the keying system, the core problem remains unsolved through 1939 and into 1940. The team can sometimes read the vowels, can occasionally make educated guesses about the underlying plaintext when they have good cribs and favorable conditions, but they cannot systematically decrypt purple messages. They cannot build a replica machine because they don't understand how the consonants are enciphered. They cannot give the State Department or military planners reliable, timely intelligence on Japanese diplomatic communications. Abraham Sinkoff and Solomon Kullback spend countless hours analyzing the mathematical relationships between plaintext and ciphertext consonants, searching for the kind of cyclic patterns that would indicate rotors or stepping switches, similar to what Rosen found for the vowels. But the consonants don't behave like the vowels. Their encipherment shows no obvious cyclical structure, no repeated sequences, no patterns that yield to standard cryptanalytic techniques. It's as if the consonants are being scrambled by a completely different mechanism than the vowels, which would be an unusual design choice but not impossible. Through late 1939 and the first half of 1940, the Signal Intelligence Service is essentially deadlocked. They've made progress. They understand part of Purple's structure, can sometimes extract limited information from intercepts, know more about the machine than they did 18 months earlier. But limited information and partial understanding aren't enough when the strategic stakes are this high. Europe is at war, France has fallen, Britain is fighting for survival, and Japan's imperial ambitions are expanding across Asia. The United States needs to know what instructions Tokyo is sending its embassies, what Japan's diplomatic strategy is, whether war in the Pacific is imminent. And the Signal Intelligence Service, despite William Friedman's brilliance and his team's dedication and 18 months of relentless effort, cannot provide that intelligence. The weight of that failure, the knowledge that American policy is being made without the benefit of Japanese communications intelligence, gnaws at Friedman. He drives himself harder, works longer hours, pushes his team to try new approaches, to revisit old analyses, to maintain hope and discipline in the face of a problem that seems designed to defeat them. By September 1940, they're working with a corpus of over 1,000 Purple intercepts. Somewhere in that mountain of encrypted text, there must be patterns, correlations, some mathematical structure that can be exploited. The cryptanalysts compile messages with identical indicators, convert messages from different days to equivalent indicators using Raven's keying discoveries, subject everything to exhaustive statistical analysis. And on September 20th, 1940, in that third-floor office of the munitions building, Genevieve Grotjan finally sees what they've been searching for. She sees the correlations between plain text and ciphertext consonants, the cyclic sequences that reveal Purple's internal structure, the breakthrough that will transform everything. But that story belongs to her. September 22-25, 1940. Munitions Building, Washington, D.C. The breakthrough that Genevieve Grotjan delivered on September 20th is like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that suddenly makes visible the shape of the larger picture. The correlations she's identified between plain text and ciphertext consonants reveal that the consonants, like the vowels, follow cyclic patterns. They cycle through 25 positions before the pattern repeats. But unlike the vowels, which all cycle through the same fixed pattern, the consonants appear to cycle through different patterns, depending on which consonant is being enciphered. It's the critical insight that breaks open the entire machine. Frank Rowlett immediately grasps the implications. Instead of one stepping switch controlling all vowel encipherment and a separate mechanism controlling all consonant encipherment uniformly, Purple must use a more sophisticated architecture. There must be a separate stepping switch or rotor for each of the 26 letters of the alphabet, each one cycling through its own predetermined sequence. This is an extraordinary design, not a commercial telephone switchboard design, but a custom cryptographic architecture that would require the Japanese to hand-construct each Purple machine with extreme precision. Within hours of Grotjan's discovery, the entire operation pivots. Friedman calls in every available cryptanalyst, every assistant, every person who can do mathematical calculations or mechanical drawing. They need to work out the internal structure of these rotor stepping patterns, to figure out which letters are connected to which rotors, to reconstruct the complete electrical wiring diagram of a machine that sits in Japanese embassies around the world, but not in any American laboratory. Leo Rosen, working with Frank Rowlett and Albert Small, takes the lead on the mechanical reconstruction. Using the correlation data that Grotjan identified and that the cryptanalysts are now furiously extracting from the corpus of intercepts, Rosen begins to sketch out the machine's architecture. If each letter has its own stepping switch, then there must be some kind of master synchronization mechanism to ensure that all 26 switches advance in the correct sequence and at the right time. The Japanese, being practical engineers, would probably use a mechanism similar to what's used in telephone switching systems, a master stepping switch that cycles through positions and causes the individual letter rotor switches to step in a predetermined pattern. Over the next 5 days, a picture emerges from the mathematical analysis and the mechanical intuition of engineers and mathematicians working together in a way that pure cryptanalysts and pure engineers couldn't achieve separately. Purple uses a system of stepping switches wired so that when a letter is pressed on the keyboard, the electrical signal travels through a series of stepping switches, each one adding a layer of substitution to transform plain text into ciphertext. The key settings for each day determine the starting positions of these stepping switches, and the indicator groups at the beginning of each message tell the receiving operator how to configure the machine for decryption. The breakthrough brings with it a new problem: building a replica machine. The cryptanalysts now understand the machine's logic, but understanding and replicating are different challenges. They need stepping switches, need them wired correctly, need them synchronized precisely. The telephone companies have this equipment, but acquiring it without drawing attention would be difficult and might require military authorization that would expose the intelligence operation. Leo Rosen and his engineering team begin to improvise, to fabricate components from available materials, to build a working purple replica from first principles. The cryptanalytic team, meanwhile, is working around the clock to extract the complete wiring diagram from the intercepts. Every message contains tiny pieces of information. If they can decode the indicator groups, if they can work out how the machine is configured for each message, if they can track how the stepping switches advance from message to message, they can build a complete picture of how the machine works. Abraham Sinkoff and Solomon Kulbak are working with Grotjan now, building on her initial breakthrough to extract more and more detailed information about the stepping patterns. They're cross-referencing indicators across hundreds of messages, calculating the mathematical relationships between plain texts and ciphertexts, slowly assembling an instruction manual for a machine they've never seen. The work is tedious, eye-straining, requiring absolute precision because a single calculation error could invalidate the entire theoretical framework. William Friedman, physically present in the operations room for the first time in weeks, watches his team working with an intensity that he hasn't seen before. This is what he's been waiting for. Not just partial progress, but the moment when the entire puzzle becomes visible and you can see how all the pieces fit together. There's still enormous work ahead, but the path is clear now. They're no longer working in darkness. By September 25th, 6 days after Grotjan's breakthrough, the Signal Intelligence Service has a preliminary understanding of Purple's architecture and the stepping sequences that control its operation. It's not complete. There are still details to work out, still uncertainties about specific wiring configurations, still gaps in their knowledge. But it's enough. It's enough to start building the replica machine, enough to test theories against intercepts, enough to give the team confidence that they're on the right path. For William Friedman, watching his team work through these days of revelation and reconstruction, there's an overwhelming sense of vindication. 18 months of doubt, criticism, and near impossible intellectual labor have led to this moment. The Signal Intelligence Service is about to do something that no allied nation has accomplished: build a replica of an enemy cipher machine without ever having captured one, without photographs or technical drawings, without anything except intercepted messages and mathematical insight. But there's still a long road ahead. Sesame 7, First Light, September 27-30, 1940, Munitions Building, Washington, D.C. The first replica purple machine is a jury-rigged contraption that would look utterly unimpressive to anyone who didn't understand what it represents. Constructed from improvised components, stepping switches scavenged from telephone company equipment, wires assembled by hand, according to diagrams extracted from intercepted ciphertext, it's not beautiful and it's not elegant. But when Frank Rowlett feeds an intercepted message through this homemade machine, something extraordinary happens. The ciphertext transforms into plain text. There's a moment of absolute silence in the operations room when the first complete message emerges. A diplomatic cable from the Japanese embassy in Rome, now readable, no longer a string of incomprehensible letters, but actual words conveying actual meaning. Abraham Sinkoff and Solomon Kullback stare at the plain text coming off the machine, their eyes wide with disbelief, their minds struggling to process that 18 months of impossibly difficult work has finally produced results. Albert Small and Robert Ferner double-check the plain text against the ciphertext, verifying that this isn't a calculation error or a statistical coincidence, but the genuine article. It's still enciphered in Phillips code, still requiring the codebook to convert AIBSNN into United States or YBIMTC into Pacific, but that's almost trivial now compared to what they've just accomplished. They've built Purple from pure mathematical analysis and intercepts. They've reconstructed the machine's logic without ever seeing the physical device. And now they're reading Japanese diplomatic traffic in real time. Word spreads through the Signal Intelligence Service with the speed of electricity. People who've been working on the periphery of the Purple effort for months suddenly find themselves called into the operations room to witness the machine operating, to see for themselves that the impossible has been achieved. Assistants, typists, junior analysts, everyone wants to watch the machine work, wants to be part of this moment. William Friedman stands silently, watching the machine produce plain text from ciphertext, and for the first time in months, his face shows something like peace. The exhaustion is still there, the weight he's been carrying is still visible, but there's also a profound satisfaction, the knowledge that he was right to push his team, right to believe that this problem could be solved, right to refuse to accept failure. He looks at Genevieve Grotjen, the young woman whose insight about the stepping sequences opened the door to all of this, and tells her simply, "You've solved it." Over the next 3 days, the cryptanalytic team furiously works to expand the replica machine's capabilities and fix any remaining issues. The basic mechanism works, but there are glitches, occasional letters that don't decipher correctly, rotor alignments that need adjustment. Leo Rosen and his engineering team debug the mechanical systems, ensuring that all the stepping switches are advancing in precise synchronization and that the electrical connections are absolutely accurate. By September 30th, exactly 20 months after the first Purple intercepts arrived at the Signal Intelligence Service, the replica machine is fully operational. It can decrypt Purple messages reliably and repeatedly. The cryptanalytic team has now decrypted sufficient messages to be confident they understand all the critical aspects of Purple's design. They're reading Japanese diplomatic cables from Tokyo to its embassies in Washington, Berlin, Rome, London, Moscow, and dozens of other locations around the world. The intelligence flooding in is extraordinary. Within days of breaking Purple, the State Department has in hand diplomatic cables revealing Japanese strategy, Japanese assessments of American capabilities, Japanese intentions toward European colonial possessions in Southeast Asia. These aren't vague suspicions or third-hand reports. They're the direct communications of Tokyo's diplomats and government officials, encrypted by the Japanese themselves in the belief that Purple is unbreakable. The Americans are reading Japan's diplomatic correspondence almost in real time, receiving weeks' worth of advance notice of Japanese diplomatic initiatives and strategic plans. The intelligence program receives a code name, MAGIC, The intercepts themselves are labeled magic, and only the highest levels of government, the President, the Secretary of State, the top military commanders, are authorized to know that America has broken purple. The security is absolute, the compartmentalization rigid, because if Tokyo learns that magic has been compromised, they'll abandon purple and develop a new machine, and 18 months of work will be rendered useless. Major General Joseph Mauborgne receives a report detailing the breakthrough, and for a man accustomed to military bureaucracy and official channels, his response is remarkable in its enthusiasm. The Signal Intelligence Service has solved what is believed to be a very complicated cipher, he writes, with characteristic understatement about an achievement that ranks among the greatest cryptanalytic accomplishments of the war. For the cryptanalytic team themselves, there's a profound sense of vindication mixed with a strange exhaustion. They've been sustained for 18 months by the belief that purple could be broken, and now that belief has been proven correct. But the intensity required to maintain that belief while facing constant setbacks, the psychological pressure of working on a problem that seems impossible, the endless hours of analysis that led nowhere before leading everywhere, it all catches up to them now. William Friedman, who has been the driving force behind this entire effort, feels the weight of those 18 months finally settling on his shoulders. He's been running on willpower and faith in his team's abilities, and that willpower can only carry you so far before the body and mind demand a price. The breaking of purple represents the pinnacle of his career, the justification for a lifetime of work in cryptanalysis, the proof that his methods and his team are the best in the world. But as October begins and the fresh intercepts keep coming, as magic starts flowing to the highest levels of government, as the Signal Intelligence Service transitions from struggling research organization to essential intelligence operation, Friedman begins to feel something shifting inside him, something breaking. The magic flows. October 1940 to December 1941. Washington, D.C., Tokyo, and points between. The first magic intercepts, reaching President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's desk in early October 1940, contain nothing less than the complete diplomatic record of Japanese strategic thinking. Tokyo's communications with its ambassadors reveal Japan's plan for imperial expansion, the creation of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere encompassing all of Southeast Asia, the Dutch East Indies, and the Western Pacific. The Japanese are maneuvering to isolate China from Western support, positioning themselves to seize European colonial territories in Asia as Europe is consumed by war, and calculating the odds of a confrontation with the United States. For Roosevelt and his Secretary of State Cordell Hull, magic provides unprecedented insight into Japanese intentions during a critical period. In October 1940, Japan formally enters the Tripartite Pact with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, creating the Axis alliance that will define the coming war. Magic intercepts are providing foreknowledge of this move, context for understanding Japanese thinking, and intelligence about Japanese calculations regarding American response. The State Department can now conduct diplomatic negotiations with Japan while knowing exactly what Tokyo is instructing its ambassadors to say, knowing what Tokyo's bottom line is, knowing what Japan's diplomatic strategy has become. Throughout 1941, as tensions between the United States and Japan escalate, magic becomes the foundation of American policy toward Japan. The intercepts reveal Tokyo's mounting desperation as American economic sanctions, including an embargo on oil exports to Japan, squeeze the Japanese economy. They show Japanese military and political leaders discussing the possibility of a preemptive strike against American naval bases, debating whether war with the United States is inevitable, calculating the odds of defeating American naval power in the Pacific. The intercepts even hint at specific Japanese military operations being planned, though Magic's focus on diplomatic rather than military communications limits its value for tactical military intelligence. The breaking of Purple has transformed American intelligence in ways that ripple across the entire government. The Signal Intelligence Service, once a struggling, underfunded operation that struggled to justify its existence, suddenly becomes indispensable. Requests for additional funding, which had been routinely denied, are now approved without question. Personnel authorization, which had been a constant struggle, expands as Friedman hires new cryptanalysts and support staff to handle the volume of Magic intercepts. But for William Friedman personally, success brings its own kind of torment. For 2 years, he drove himself and his team toward an almost impossible goal, sustained by the belief that Purple could be broken, refusing to accept defeat. That extraordinary effort, maintained at an unsustainable intensity over months and months, extracted a price that he's only beginning to understand. The war comes to America on December 7, 1941, with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The intercepts had warned of Japanese military preparations, had indicated that something was coming, but they hadn't provided tactical warning of the specific time, place, and nature of the attack. Military communications, which would have contained the operational details, used a different, unbroken cipher system. So while Magic had provided strategic intelligence about Japanese intentions, it hadn't prevented the catastrophe at Pearl Harbor. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, there's a brief moment when some people in government question whether Magic has been as valuable as claimed, whether the intelligence operation was worth the resources if it couldn't prevent the attack. But that criticism fades quickly as the war begins in earnest, and Magic proves invaluable for strategic planning, diplomatic negotiation, and intelligence about Japanese intentions and capabilities. Frank Rowlett, Abraham Sinkoff, Solomon Kullback, and the rest of Friedman's core team continue the work of reading Magic intercepts as the United States fully commits to war. But the celebration of Purple's breakthrough has given way to the grim reality of total war. The stakes are incomprehensibly high, the responsibility enormous, the pressure relentless. And William Friedman, the man who made all of this possible, is falling apart. The man who paid the price, January 1941 to August 1941. Munitions building, Washington, D.C. and beyond. The physical signs appear first. By early January 1941, only about 2 months after the triumphant breaking of Purple, William Friedman's appearance begins to concern those closest to him. He's lost more weight, bringing his frame to something approaching skeletal. His hands tremble occasionally, especially when he's tired or under stress. The dark circles under his eyes have become permanent fixtures, and his sleep, which was already irregular, becomes completely disrupted. He's experiencing severe tension headaches that sometimes prevent him from working. His wife, Elizabeth, herself a skilled cryptanalyst, with her own demanding intelligence duties fighting Nazi agents in South America, notices the deterioration and urges him to see a physician. Friedman resists, insisting that he's simply tired and that things will improve once the organization gets fully established in its new role. But he's not simply tired. What he's experiencing is a complete nervous breakdown, the physical and psychological price extracted by 18 months of maintaining impossible focus under crushing pressure. By February 1941, Friedman's condition is impossible to ignore. He has days when he can barely function, when the anxiety becomes so severe that he can't leave his office, when his mind races with obsessive thoughts about Purple, about whether they've really understood the machine correctly, about whether Tokyo might have abandoned Purple in favor of a new cipher machine that they haven't detected yet. The work continues around him. Intercepted messages are decrypted by his team. Magic intercepts are distributed to the highest levels of government, but Friedman is increasingly disconnected from the operation he created. In March 1941, Friedman's condition worsens dramatically. He experiences what he'll later describe as a severe psychiatric crisis, a complete breakdown of the psychological mechanisms that have sustained him. He's admitted to Walter Reed Medical Center, where military neuropsychiatrists attempt to diagnose and treat what they initially assume is combat fatigue or shell shock. But Friedman hasn't seen combat, hasn't been exposed to the kinds of traumatic events that typically produce such symptoms. What he's experiencing is something different, the nervous breakdown of a man who has pushed himself far beyond the limits of human endurance, who has maintained unsustainable focus and pressure for too long, whose brilliant mind has essentially exhausted itself. The Army's medical establishment doesn't fully understand what's happened to Friedman, and the treatments available in 1941, sedation, rest, psychiatric counseling, are crude and not particularly effective for the kind of condition he's experiencing. He remains hospitalized for an extended period, essentially unable to work, isolated from the cryptanalytic operation that he created and that continues without him. For Frank Rowlett, Abraham Sinkoff, and Solomon Kullback, the sight of their mentor and leader, the man who taught them cryptanalysis, who led them through 18 months of impossible work, who believed in them when success seemed impossible, broken and hospitalized, is devastating. They maintain the operation, continue the work of reading magic intercepts, ensure that intelligence flows to American military and political leaders. But something has shifted. The team that celebrated Genevieve Grotjan's breakthrough with Coca-Cola's and unbridled joy must now grapple with the knowledge that the cost of their achievement may have been their leader's health and sanity. Friedman remains hospitalized through April, May, June, and into July 1941. The prognosis is uncertain. The physicians can't guarantee that he'll fully recover. There's discussion within the Army Signal Corps about whether Friedman will be able to return to active duty, whether someone else should be appointed to permanently lead the Signal Intelligence Service. Meanwhile, Pearl Harbor lies in the future, but magic intercepts are warning of increasing Japanese military preparations and escalating tensions. By August 1941, Friedman's condition begins to stabilize, though he remains far from recovered. He's released from Walter Reed, but placed on medical leave, prohibited from returning to active cryptanalytic work. Elizabeth brings him home, and for the first time in months, he's removed from the constant pressure of the Signal Intelligence Service. His doctors warn him that he needs extended rest, that his nervous system has been severely damaged, that he should expect a slow and potentially incomplete recovery. But William Friedman, the man who can never truly stop working, who sees cryptanalytic problems even in his dreams, who is psychologically unable to ignore the intellectual challenges that surround him, finds the enforced rest more maddening than the work itself. He knows that magic continues without him, that his team is handling the intelligence operation, that the work is being done. But he also knows that there are problems only he can solve, insights only he might have, and his inability to contribute feels like a form of torture. The legacy of Breaking Purple is therefore complicated. It's a triumph of American cryptanalysis, the greatest single achievement of Friedman's career, the culmination of a decade's worth of building a professional signal intelligence organization. It gives the United States strategic intelligence that will prove invaluable throughout the war, particularly in the Pacific, where magic intercepts will reveal Japanese military strength, capabilities, and intentions. But it's also the work that broke William Friedman, that extracted a price from him, that he'll spend the rest of his life recovering from. He'll eventually return to work in a limited capacity, will oversee the Signal Intelligence Service's transformation into the legendary NSA. But he'll never fully regain the energy and boundless intellectual enthusiasm that characterized him before Purple. The man who broke the Japanese cipher machine also broke himself in the process. His team, Rowlett, Sinkoff, Kullback, Rosen, Grotjahn, and dozens of others continue the work. They build additional Purple replica machines, distribute them to the Army and Navy for independent decryption of magic intercepts. They train additional cryptanalysts in the techniques required to read Purple. They help coordinate with the British, French, and Dutch cryptanalytic services, sharing methodologies and technical insights. The American cryptanalytic achievement at Purple stands as testimony to what human intelligence, mathematical insight, and relentless dedication can accomplish even under conditions of near impossible difficulty. Genevieve Grotjahn, the young woman whose observation about stepping sequences cracked open the machine's secrets, will spend the rest of her career as a civilian employee of the US military, never receiving public credit for her breakthrough, her contribution known only to those cleared for the closest held intelligence secret of the war. And somewhere in the Japanese diplomatic system, Tokyo never learns that Purple has been broken, never understands that American officials have been reading their most secret communications. The intelligence flows one direction only, from Japanese embassies to the United States, decoded and analyzed by men and women working in the munitions building and, after the war, in the specially constructed headquarters of the National Security Agency. The machine that Japan built to keep their secrets secure has instead betrayed them to American intelligence, not through capture or espionage, but through the extraordinary cryptanalytic achievement of William Friedman's team. In the end, the greatest intelligence weapon isn't a machine at all. It's the human mind, capable of understanding patterns and structure and meaning in seemingly random text, capable of reverse engineering the impossible, capable of rebuilding a machine that exists only as mathematics and imagination. That's the real Purple story.